Welcome to this class on the methods of economic analysis. Today we are introducing the value added. So this is part 1 of value added. We'll have a part 2 about value added in next class. So value added is one of the methods we can use in order to assess the impact of a project on the economy as a whole. And this is because value added for all producers of goods and services is a measure of national income, so which in turn is the basis for consumption and savings. So using the value added as basis to assess the impact of a project allows us to determine the expected impact of the project on the national income, so on national objectives. So accordingly, the outline of this class is organized as follows. We'll have first an introduction to value added, where we'll provide some initial definitions. Then we analyze the different stages of value added formation. Then we look at the compositions and levels of value added, looking at different possible interpretation of value added. And then we'll conclude this class looking at the pricing of the value added components. Okay, so we start from an introduction and we provide an initial definition of value added. Value added is a method of analyzing the economic impact of an investment project, and this I was saying at the beginning of this class. This is value added in particular can be a relevant indicator because at the aggregate level these represent the national income of a country, and therefore if a project is creating value added, this means that it is positively impacting the national income of a country. We'll see in these and next classes that value added is mainly made by two components. One is represented by wages and salaries, that is the total compensations of all the employees and workers that are occupied by a project. And then there is what is generally defined as social surplus, that is the sum of all the other rents and incomes that are different from wages and salaries that are perceived by individuals thanks to the project. So we'll see more in detail the definition of social surplus in the next slides of this class. And what is really important about value added and really explains the difference between the economic perspective and of a national government and the financial perspective of private investor is about the role of wages and salaries. Because when we analyze the project from a financial point of view, we have seen that wages are typically represent a cost for a project. In particular, from a financial point of view, they represent an outflows. So basically, the project is to pay for wages and salaries, and so this is a negative component of the cash flow. And negative, the higher the wages, the lower the value of the project will be. From this point of view, instead, the government has a different perspective, because as wages and salaries are positive component of the value added of the country, the fact that a project is high value added can be a positive aspect for that project from the perspective of the national government. So projects with high wages and salaries can have high value for national governments because they create value added. Clearly, it's important to also to understand, as we'll also explain in the next class, if value added is made mainly by wage and salary, so there is also social surplus, because if the wage and salaries, let's say, are higher than value added, this means that the project is a negative social surplus. And this means that it's producing losses for the project, and so it's not financially viable, and therefore this could become a problem for the financial sustainability of the project. Moreover, it can happen that in a country where there is a low level of savings, A government could prefer a project with higher social surplus rather than higher salaries, because higher social surplus generates the basis for savings and so for future investments. So not only value added is important, but also in the perspective of a government, how this value added is distributed between wages and social surplus. So if we want to look at greater detail into the components of the value added, we can divide, as we said, wages and salaries from social surplus. So as I was saying before, wages and salaries are the total compensation paid by the project to workers and employees that are engaged in the project activities, whereas the social surplus is made by all the other income that the project is generating and that are different from wages and salaries. In particular, in social surplus, we find profits for the equity investor. So as we know, an investor that decides to invest money as a shareholder in a project is expecting some profit. He has a residual claim on the profits, so profits are the income that typically accrue to shareholders. Then we have interest and rents that are typically paid to other financial investors. And then in the social surplus, we also find indirect taxes that are that represent the share of the value added that is accruing to the government through the payment of taxes. And therefore, also the government is participating into the social surplus generated by a project through the mean of indirect taxes. In other words, the social surplus can be defined as the excess of value added after that wages and salaries have been paid. So as I was saying before, the project is generating a given value added. A given part of this value added is used to pay wages and salary. What remains after paying wages and salaries is social surplus, and then it's distributed among shareholders, creditors, other financial investors, and government, depending on how the project has been funded, the contractual relationship, the taxation, and so on. So it can happen also that wages and salaries are higher than value added. In general, this means that social surplus in this case could be negative if the project is generating losses for the private investors. So this is something that we can account and control through some tests that we'll discuss in these classes on value added. So from a strictly algebraic point of view, we can define value added as represented in this slide. We first start from profits. That is the first equation that we see in this slide, so on the first row. As we know, profits are given by the difference of revenues and different kinds of costs and investment. In particular, here R says for revenues, S is the cost for wages and salaries, M is the cost for intermediate materials, I is the investment, and then we'll discuss that a bit more. And O is represented by all the other costs that are rents, interest, and taxes. So the idea here is that the profit is what you get. After that, from revenues, you eliminate all the costs or outflows that the project has to pay. So now here we have included the investment because we are adopting a dynamic view. So we are including the investment in the moment the project is paying for the acquisition of capital assets. But in a static view, you could look at the accounting measure of depreciation. So in this case, you will substitute the I that is here with depreciation, and in order to have a measure of the capital consumption in a given moment for that given period. Instead, if you have a dynamic view, as we already explained in the classes on financial analysis, you calculate the present values of the cash flows, and so what you're interested in is not the moment you have the accounting depreciation, but the moment you pay for the capital assets you need for the project. So this is the profit equation. So this is the equation that says to us what will be the profit for the shareholders of the project. But we can simply reaggregate this equation from an algebraic point of view by bringing the S, and so the wages and costs and the other costs that are measure of social surplus, as we were discussing before, on the left side of this equation. So in this equation we have a profit plus wages and salaries plus other costs that represent interest, rents, and direct taxes. So they are here. They can be defined as the social surplus we saw before. And on the other side of the equation, you have revenues minus intermediate materials minus investment or depreciation, if we adopt a static view of the value added. So the three variables that are on the left, the sum of these three variables represent what you define as value added. So we have the social, the wages and salaries, that is the first component, and then the sum of profits and other costs represent the social surplus. So if you add wages and salary to profit and other costs that are jointly considered the social surplus, you get the value added. So the value added is simply calculated as the difference between revenues, intermediate materials, and the outflow for capital asset or the depreciation cost that you have for capital assets. This is the most basic definition of value added, and therefore the second equation is saying to us that if you want to calculate, the most simple way to calculate the value added of a project is to subtract intermediate materials and investments from revenues, and this way you get the value added for the project at that particular moment, or for the whole life of the project. So, but the reason why we are focusing on value added, as I was mentioning briefly in the introduction, is because value added is strictly related to national income. And in particular because aggregated value added for all producers of goods and services in the economy amounts to national income. So in other words, if I assess the contribution of a project to the value added of the country, I'm basically assessing its contribution to national income, and so its contribution to the general objective of national income growth. And therefore value added, say that, can be considered a good approximation of contribution of project to national economy for the reasons I was mentioning before. In particular case of the UNIDO, when the value added is taken as method for analyzing the impact of a project, there is a set of indicators that is considered, and that will be discussed in these two classes. The first indicator is what is defined as net national value added, or NVA. So this is the value added produced and distributed within the country. So clearly, by definition, it excludes imports, because these are produced outside the country, but also exclude what is typically defined as repatriate payments. Repatriate payments are that part of the value added that then is transferred beyond the borders, so to another foreign country. So it's value added that is created in the country, but does not remain in the country. So in this case, we are subtracting this component, even though it's produced in the country that we are analyzing. Then they also consider income distribution effects, in particular through the analysis of distribution of value added across social groups. And as we have already discussed for the economic cost benefit analysis, this is important because the national goals cannot just be limited to the analysis of undifferentiated income, that is income without accounting for the effect of distribution. So the analysis can not only focus on the creation of net national value added, but can also be concerned about the distribution of the value added that is created across different social groups. And therefore, if I also, this objective, I also to have indicators that tells me how the value added is distributed across social groups. So this is something that we'll analyze in particular in the next class. And then there is a set of supplementary indicators that can be used based on value added or in additional to value added. So these are complementary indicators that provide the decision maker with additional decision criteria. And the main supplementary indicators will be analyzed in the next class. So in this class, instead, we'll focus on the first of the three indicators, that is the net national value added, and therefore we'll understand what are the different stages of creation of value added and different levels, and in particular we'll focus on net national value added stage. So another reason why we can focus on value added, so why value added becomes a useful indicator for assessing the merit of a project from national government perspective is because value added is at the basis of consumption and investments. So, and as consumption and investment are the two final objectives of a government, it's important to understand what is the value that is overall available to individuals in a country for consumption and investments. In particular, this reasoning is explained in this slide. In this slide, on the left side, you have the value added and divided into the two different components of wages and surplus. On the right side of this slide, you have consumption divided between private and public consumption. So this is consumption coming from private individual. This is consumption coming from government, so from government expenditures. And then you have investment, that as we know are basically created when the individuals forego actual consumption and invest today to get higher consumption in the future. So wages are typically used by individuals for spending, to save money for the future, and to pay taxes to the government. The surplus instead takes the form of dividends, interest, taxes, reserve of equity capital, or the creation of funds for expansion. So now there is a critical role here of the financial system that is an intermediary between the value added creation and the value added use. In particular, is participating to the redistribution of value added is basically the channel through which the value added is distributed. So here, for example, the spending of the individual passing through the markets and the financial system is transformed into private consumption. Taxes through the financial system are transformed into public consumption, and savings and also dividends, interest, taxes, and so on are transformed into investments, mainly through financial institutions. So here there is a critical role of financial institutions that collect savings from individuals and then makes this money available for investment in different forms, but typically through loans to firms that invest in new projects. So the important reason why value added is a critical indicator for the assessment of the value of a project from a government is that because it's exactly the basis for what matters more for a government, that is consumption and investments, so for what matters more in terms of economic policy. And the higher the value added, given all the other conditions, the higher consumption investment can be, because I have a larger basis for both consumption and investment. So if, for example, if I want to increase investment in a country where I have not the ability to increase value added, I have to forego actual consumption, or vice versa. If I want to increase consumption, I have to forego investments. But if I am able to increase the value added created in a country, then at that point I can increase consumption and investment, or one of the two, without sacrificing the other components. So value added is really a critical aspect that governments often consider when they assess the overall impact of projects that are realized within their countries. So in order to better understand the value added and its formation, let's look at a very simple example. So here we have three different stages of production. A first stage is the steel mill that is producing ingots. These ingots are then used at the second stage, that is here defined as intermediate stage, by rolling mills, in this case to produce steel sheets. So ingots are the output of the first stage, but are the inputs of the intermediate stage. And at the intermediate stage, the output is represented by the sheets of steel. Then the sheets of steel are used as an input at the third stage of production to realize finally consumer goods. So at the third stage of production, you have the consumer good manufacturers. So here you see that each of these stages contributes to value added, because each of these stages is adding value to the inputs that have been employed in the production. So here the three arrows that you see here represent the contribution of each of the three stages to the value added. And as you can see here, the difference is only represented by the portion that represents the difference between each stage as compared to the previous one. So in other words, what we are doing here to determine what is the value added generated by each of the production stage is to subtract from the output of that stage the input of the previous stage. And this is done for a very simple reason, that if you were adding the outputs of these three stages, without subtracting the inputs, you will double account for the inputs. So you will sum the inputs each time that you consider a new production stage. So if you are here at the intermediate stage and you consider ingots as part of the output, then you will consider the ingots two times, one here at the first stage and one here at the second stage. So the correct way to determine the value added at the intermediate stage is to calculate the value of the output, that is, this case is represented by steel sheets, and subtract the value, the price that you pay for the ingots that represents the output of the first stage of the steel mill. So value added, as it was also clear from the simple algebraic definition that we gave of value added, can be calculated as a difference between the value of the output at each stage of production and the value of the input that this stage of production is using. So this example is useful for two reasons. The first one is to understand how each stage contributes to the formation of value added at the national level. The second reason is because this simple example highlights the need of subtracting from each output at each intermediate stage the value of the input in order to avoid double accounting of the inputs when you calculate the national income. But the most precise way to determine the value added is through decomposition. And in particular here we look at the compositions and levels of value added to better understand the nature and the formation process of value added. So let's consider here a very, again, an example, a stylized example. Let's assume that we are analyzing the value added of a product. So here we have on the left the value added of a project. So the value added is this part, this rectangle represents the value of the output of the project. So the value of the output of the project includes, in this case, three different components. One is the value added. The one is the cost of local intermediate components that we define as LIC. And I represent the imports that have been used for this project. So here we are talking about the inputs that have been acquired not on domestic market, but from a foreign market. So what we know for sure is that this we are focusing on the national, net national value added. We are interested in the value added that is created in the country. So all what is an input and moreover is imported is clearly not part of the value added. So that's why it's considered separately here in the value of the output. The other thing that you could do is at this point subtract the value of the local intermediate components and so get value added. And value added one is value added that you get from this first stage of analysis, this first level of decomposition. But if we look at the local intermediate component that are required by a project, we have to understand also another point. And the other point is that when we are realizing a new project, this new project does not only create a value added at this level, so at the level of the output immediately generated by this project, but it's also inducing more production in the inputs. And this production of the inputs that we see in stage 2, so the second level of decomposition, is also some value added that is created at the local level. And here, at the stage level 2 of decomposition, you have, again, in isolation, identification of an additional component of value added, that is the value added that is generated by the increase in supply of inputs for the project. So the project, in other words, is not only generating value added from its immediate output, but it's also generating an additional component of value added given that it's created a higher demand for the local production of inputs. Clearly, if we look at the value of the local intermediate components, what we can see that there is clearly a part coming from imports, so that is excluded again. There is again a part that is related to local intermediate components, and again this is not part of the value added, but there is a component of value added that is indirectly linked to this project. And so if we are more precise, this part of value added should be also included in the total value added of the project. Finally, again, at the third level of decomposition, we could also analyze the components of the local intermediate components that were used for the level 2 inputs. And again, we can find that also at level 3 there is a component of value added that is to be considered in the calculations. So in the end, the total value added created by a project is given by the sum of the value added that the project is generating directly, plus the value added that is generated by the producers of the inputs for the project. And this is due to the fact that these producers are producing more inputs because an increased demand of the inputs for the project, and this increased demand of inputs for the project is generating an increased value added that therefore can be indirectly attributed to the project. And so what we can see here is that the total value added of the project is higher than the value added that we observe at the first level of decomposition. So if we are looking only at the output of the generated directly from the project, but also include the value added generated upstream by the producer of the inputs of the project. So this is also a part of value added that is relevant for the country for generation of national income. So we can at this point identify different levels of value added. So if we focus on the total output that is represented by the dimension of this initial rectangle, we can start from the gross value added that is given by the value, the total output minus the value of material inputs, and this is the gross value added. However, we are interested in the value added net also of investment, because clearly investment, even though they refer to capital assets, are material inputs that reduce the social surplus, so they reduce the value available to pay other forms of income other than wages and salaries. So if we subtract investment from gross value added, we have a net domestic value added. So in other words, we can also say that the sum of net domestic value added and investment gives again the gross value added. Or we can say in a positive way that the gross value added is given by net domestic value added and investment made for a given project. Then we have another step that brings us from the definition net domestic value added to what is of interest to us instead. That is the net national value added. So this is, for example, the parameter that is chosen by the UNIDO for the value added analysis of a project. And there is an important difference between net domestic value added and net national value added. That is a difference I was also mentioning before. In addition, the difference is that part of the net domestic value added will be repatriated or beyond borders. So probably it's generated in the country, but by foreign subjects, and so the foreign subject then will bring home part of the value added in form of repatriated payments. So if I want to know not only what is the value added created in that country, but I also want to know as final information what is the value added that is created and then remains in that country, I have to pass from the net domestic value added to the net national value added, and then it's taken as the basis for determining the impact of a project on value added. So what matters in the end is not only what is the value added generated in that country, but then what is the value added that remains available in that country to be used for consumption and investment. So we can also say that the net domestic value added that was defined here is the sum of the net national value added plus the repatriated payments that are payments that, as I was saying before, foreign subjects make beyond the borders of the country we are analyzing. And finally, what we know is that in this net national value added we have two components. These two components are wages and social surplus. And if you take the sum of these two components, you will have the net national value added. So as you can see, starting from the output generated by a project, you can identify value added at different levels that goes from the gross value added to the net national value added. Here, the difference between gross value added and net domestic value added is represented by investment. And here, the difference between net domestic value added and net national value added is represented by repatriated payments. So in the end, what remains in the country available for future, for actual consumption or for future consumption, and therefore for investment, is the net national value added, that therefore is the basis for our analysis. At this point, we have the last issue of value added, that is the pricing of different value added components. Because as you have understood, in determining the value added, we have wages and we have salaries, and we have income, and the problem is that we have to set a basis to determine the correct pricing method for each of these two or each of these components. So in the pricing or the value-added components, we have two basic choices, as we have understood at this point. The two basic points, the two basic choices are the market prices and the accounting prices, and we know at this point that there can be a difference between market prices and accounting prices. This is because of the effects of market distortion on market prices. So market prices cannot reflect the true value of the resources that are used for in the project or that are generated by a project. And moreover, there is the role of externalities that again creates problem with market prices if externalities are not included in market prices. So this latter topic will be analyzed in the next class. So we have to decide for each of the value-added component if we are working on the market prices or accounting prices. Well, what we can say as a start is that when we are calculating value added for the purpose of generating calculating the aggregated national income, we refer to market prices. So this is the only way you can calculate national income. So national income is typically calculated on the basis of market price, both domestic market price and also border price in the form of export and import prices. So the market prices definition here refers to both domestic price, so the prices applied in domestic markets, and border price in the form, as we saw, of FOB and CIF. Instead, at the level of the project, you can use again market prices, but it can be meaningful to use accounting shadow prices in substitution of market prices. And this is because the accounting price can reflect in a more appropriate way the impact of the project on the numeraire that we have chosen for our analysis. So if in the end we are interested in increase of consumption of a project, accounting prices could reflect better than market prices the impact of a project on the parameters that reflects our general goal. So at this point we have finished this class. We have introduced the value added. In the next class we'll analyze further details of the value added calculation. And I thank you for your attention and remind you as usual that for additional materials you can refer to the course website. So thank you for your attention.